Hi everyone, this is Jason Barrack of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest here to talk about a very interesting topic and a topic that our listeners have asked us to finally cover and bring about, because it looks like we're starting a bull market here, especially the last couple of years, and there's very interesting investing opportunities, whether it's in the U.S. or Canada. His name is Chris Parry. He was a journalist at the Vancouver Sun for 5 years, and now he writes at Canada's largest investing website, stockhouse.com, for the last 2. He's here to talk about the marijuana industry. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Anytime, Jason.
Now, Chris, we were talking about this before we started recording. The U.S. has had a drug war on against marijuana, against other drugs, but mostly marijuana for a very long time, for many decades. Spent a lot of money on the drug war for police and loading it up. There's been people with very little marijuana, and they've gotten very long drug charges. What do you think has changed in this market to open it up for investing opportunity, whether it's the U.S. or Canada now?
Well, the easy answer to that is to look back at Prohibition and how that came about and how it failed, and look at marijuana as being basically a longer-term process that was much the same. Depriving people of something because someone somewhere says it's bad, and because maybe there's an industrial and economic reason to suppress an industry, isn't always going to be a long-term solution. The simple fact of the matter is people enjoy marijuana, and just as eventually, Prohibition failed miserably and became a boon for the crime syndicates, so too was a prohibition on marijuana. There have been generations of criminals who've made their living out of it, and generations of human beings who've been thrown into prison because they're having a toke on a weekend or being busted with some in their car. So it just doesn't make any economic sense. It doesn't make any human sense to wash great waves of money thrown away and lives thrown away for something that's really just a notion that marijuana is bad. I don't know anybody who's smoked a blunt on the weekend and then gone on a rage in a nightclub. Usually I've seen plenty of people do that with alcohol, and alcohol is an accepted industry and has been for a long time. Marijuana will eventually be the same thing. You'll eventually be buying it in Walgreens, but right now we're in that process of people who've lived their whole lives thinking it was evil, coming to grips with the fact that maybe they were just buying a party line.
Yeah, that's a good point about marijuana, and you brought up the violence of other drug use and alcohol use and things like that. Normally when people smoke marijuana, right, they just want to watch a movie or eat some junk food or something like that and fall asleep on the couch or play video games or something.
Yeah.
So it's not really known as PCP or something like that, where someone does it and then goes and kills 10 cops and things like that. It's not known as that. It's although the labeling that it was in the U.S., the war on drugs, is the gateway drug, right? That leads to all these other, once you get on that track of marijuana, you're going to start doing all these other bad drugs that are going to lead to violent crimes and things like that.
Yeah, but what people used to say about rock and roll, is what people used to say about races that were mixed dating each other. There's always hysteria out there that one thing is going to lead to another if we let people do it. Gay marriage is going to lead to people marrying their dogs, is what Rick Santorum said. And now, just 2 years after everyone was freaking out about gay marriage, it barely rates a mention when it gets accepted in places around North America. So, I think marijuana has very quickly become something that's gone from forbidden to something where people are just trying to figure out how they can make it okay without it being like an ex-Soviet gold rush for assets. What are all the people who've been in the crime world and making money with illegal grow-ops going to do for a living now that sort of industry is not going to be so profitable? Are they going to go and sell insurance, or are they going to go and go to college? To me, that's the big issue with legalizing the marijuana trade is what happens to the backwash of all those illegal industries that have been around for 20, 30, 40 years. Where do they go from here to try and keep their money coming in the door?
Well, maybe they'll become legitimate, and maybe they'll stop doing, dangerous things like murdering people for drug money and things like that, maybe they'll decide to start a legitimate business and things like that. Because, you look at the history, you brought up the bootleggers, that's how, with Prohibition, that's how the industry started. I mean, there was an economic incentive, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Prohibition, the alcohol, people still wanted the alcohol. They wanted to have fun. They wanted to gamble. They went to the speakeasies. They were willing to pay the bootleggers. That's how NASCAR started.
Right.
So most people don't even realize NASCAR started due to bootlegging. And then, that's how organized crime started.
Well,
but when you
go to any artisan distillery store in Portland, and you'll find jars and jars of moonshine, like we're even at a point now where people are using the old illegal brand names or illegal product names to try and sell stuff legitimately now. Like, I think what it really comes down to is I don't know many people who want the government telling people what they can and cannot do unless what they're doing is harming other people. And to me, soda is probably a lot more harmful than marijuana is. As a gateway to bad health, donuts are probably a lot worse than marijuana is. So really, it sort of just comes down to a place of eventually economic rationalism comes into play. People realize that if they, instead of spending money fighting it, they could be making money by selling it. And in Canada at least, that's gone to the next step where rather than just saying you can sell it, the government has put in place standards that companies and growers must hit in order to be accepted as sellers, which kind of still leaves the grey market in place a little bit. But for companies that can actually hit those high standards, the consumer is going to end up being the recipient of a much better quality product, and the taxes that can flow from that are going to be something that is going to end up paying for schools down the road.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the consumer doesn't have to worry about going to the street corner late at night and paying cash $200 for a bag of marijuana and potentially getting shot or robbed, right?
Yeah.
So there's also the safety aspect that not only are you going to get maybe a higher quality product at potentially a lower price than you would buying it on the street, you're also not risking your own life trying to buy the product, if someone pulls a gun on you or something like that, for you to buy a small amount, or even like I said here in the U.S., there was so much prison growth. I think almost all the prison growth of Americans being thrown in crime wasn't for violent crime. It was all for drug-related offenses.
Yeah.
So even if you bought a small amount of marijuana, right, or your friend did, and you were just with him when he bought it, you were going to go play video games or something,
right,
and your friend didn't even tell you where he was stopping off on the way, right, before you went and go play video games or over somewhere else, and then you get stuck as an accessory. So it's just like, in the U.S. prisons are full of people like that.
Yeah, and I think if you wiped all the marijuana bookings off the books, you'd find most of the people with 3 strikes would be back down to 1 strike.
Exactly.
I noticed when Bellingham, Washington dispensary opened, there were some pictures in the press over here of the lineup out front. And I honestly thought it was going to be like just stoners and college students that were going to be coming out of the woods. But the line was actually really interesting because it was a lot of seniors, a lot of people in suits and ties, a lot of people that you'd expect to see on the weekend picking up lumber at a Home Depot. And it sort of became clear to me looking at those pictures that the real customer for weed is not somebody who's just going out and getting absolutely, cranked at 10 a.m. in the morning and eating Doritos all day. It's somebody who once every 6 months, when they got people over with a bottle of wine, might want to actually have smoke a bowl, and doesn't want to go and have to find someone behind a dumpster at a bar at 10 o'clock at night in order to make that happen. It really is going to be something that, as we get deeper into new delivery systems and derivatives, the old ways of, the old digging a core out of an apple core and sticking a pipe in it is going to be a thing of the past. This is going to be a consumer product you're not even going to see the buds 6 months, a year down the line. You're going to see pills, you're going to see edibles, you're going to see machinery that you can stick a bit of gel into, and it'll last you 3 months. This is, I tell a lot of companies that I consult with, and a lot of conferences that I talk at, like, you've got to stop saying that this is a marijuana sector, because it really isn't. It's the biotech sector, it's the health sector, it's retail, it's consumables. This is going to be an ingredient that goes into a whole ton of stuff across the board in other sectors. And no one says that no one calls the wheat sector the wheat sector. It's agriculture, and it feeds a whole bunch of other verticals, and that's what's going to happen with marijuana and marijuana derivatives over the next 6 to 12 months. It's going to be something that's in your breakfast cereal. It's going to be something that in 2 years' time you could open your medicine cabinet and find 3 drugs that have elements of cannabinoids in it. The old thinking of this is something that you're going to slip into the back pocket and hope that the cops don't search you is going to be so far out. It's going to be like now people thinking about, having to take moonshine across the border or knock on a back door in a speakeasy to get a bottle of gin. It's just old school thinking. It's gone. The states that are the last ones to legalize will be the ones that make no money out of it, and the states that are the first on the block will make the lion's share. Colorado right now is becoming weed central. They're making a ton of taxes. They've got a ton of new industries. There's a ton of businesses that are basing themselves out there because they're easier to deal with. And it's going to be like Las Vegas with gambling. It's going to be the place where people go as a tourist to enjoy their weed of a high quality.
Yeah, more even than Amsterdam. I read an article on the Huffington Post a couple months ago that said that the marijuana tourism in Colorado is already better than the marijuana tourism in Amsterdam, and that the laws are more favorable for tourists who want to smoke marijuana or buy brownies in Colorado than in Amsterdam. And to back up your point there about the project economics for states legalizing it and the economic incentive, Colorado, I think, is now making over $29 million a month in tax revenues for marijuana legalization, and that's $29 million or $30 million or so per month in extra revenue that they didn't have. And in the past, yes, maybe when they busted a drug dealer, right, they would probably seize some drugs and or the guy's property and then maybe resell it. But I can guarantee you they weren't making that type of money. That money was probably going, like we discussed earlier, probably into the pockets of the drug cartels or the other people smuggling it into the state, and that money was leaving the country
right.
to a large part, right? The money wasn't being reinvested back into the local economy.
For sure. I mean, if you think about the trillions of dollars that have been spent on illicit drugs over the last 20 years in North America, at least 80% of that money has gone to other countries. It's maybe there's a lot of speedboats being bought in Miami, but in Albuquerque, there's no benefit from the drug war or from the drug industry. In Dubuque, nobody's building schools out of drug money, but in Colorado, they're building entire industries out of it. They're building farms and processing facilities and new retail businesses, and the edibles market. I think alone, that's really where I'm sort of looking at as being the big potential for this. Is right now it's just like throwing weed in cookies, but it's going to get finessed to a place where specific strains that deal with specific things are going to be in specific food or medical elements that are going to be purchased by seniors, by senior centers, by insurance companies to deal with things that frankly now take a lot more money and a lot of more hardcore drugs to deal with. In Canada, Organogram is a company that just announced that they've got a deal with a group that's opening some healing centers, they're called. Basically, it's an organization that deals with post-traumatic stress disorder with veterans and first responders. And, the only insurable group that's been authorized to use medical marijuana for a treatment and pay for it with insurance is PTSD sufferers. So, here you've got a group that's going to set up centers specifically to deal with that affliction, of which I think there's some $40 billion spent in the U.S. each year dealing with that, with hard drugs, hard pharmaceuticals, when marijuana can treat it better for a much smaller price. And the insurance companies have realized that and have basically said, all right, let's move this forward. So, now you've got a situation where big insurance is basically saying, we've got our hands up, we're okay with marijuana. And the first company that's been able to do a deal through that has now opened the door to marijuana insurance. Insurance accepting marijuana as a treatment. You can guarantee that as soon as things like Parkinson's and arthritis and diabetes and chronic pain. The same thing that's gone through the system to allow PTSD to be treatable with marijuana, it's going to go through with all those other things as well. If it's an effective treatment and it's a cheaper treatment, then there's no way insurance companies want to keep throwing hard pharmaceuticals at people and dealing with heavy side effects and spending the sort of money they spend.
Well, Chris, I'm not sure if you're aware of the history of marijuana here in the United States, but those pharmaceutical companies, the aspirin companies, the tobacco companies, the cotton industry, the alcohol companies, those are the groups of industries that spent all the money around World War II, with the negative marijuana and hemp campaign to get marijuana made illegal in the first place. So it was a very expensive lobbying and marketing campaign because if you go back and look through the history of marijuana, I've seen marijuana documentaries, I don't know if you have, but I've seen a number of them, and there's World War II posters up that, grow your hemp, victory hemp, we need hemp for rope, we need hemp for other products and things like that during World War II and prior to that. So there's just not only the marijuana plant and the healing properties you mentioned for medical marijuana, it helps cancer patients get an appetite, and there's so many other, I think, positive things that are in the marijuana plant. I believe there's also, I've seen a documentary about hemp oil, which can potentially help with skin cancer. I don't know. I think in Canada you guys have actually tested it quite a bit, where it actually helps pretty well for skin cancer when it's applied a certain amount. But there's just so many different things that hemp and marijuana can do from an economic standpoint it's not that expensive. It's a plant, right? It can be grown. It grows pretty easily, right, compared to so many other plants.
Yeah, hemp's a really interesting thing because it really was a real base economic commodity leading into World War II. You can make so much stuff out of it. It's such an easy plant to grow. It does so little damage to the field. It's really just amazing that such a beneficial plant has been made illegal for such silly reasons for so long. But even now, when you can grow hemp in North America, it's low THC hemp, so it's basically it's muted. It's much smaller. There's much less yield from it. You can't use it for all the things you can use the heirloom hemp for. And even with the liberalization of the rules here, and people accepting that hemp's a reasonable agricultural product, you still can't grow it. You got to be using this bullshit version that no one really has that much of an economic reason to use. Whereas places like Uruguay, where they've opened the gates and said grow whatever hemp you want to grow, the hemp there can get 20 feet tall. The hemp over here is like 4 or 5 feet, and that's just based on the difference of the THC. You still can't really smoke it. It might have high THC levels, but you're not going to go out into a field of hemp and get high. It's just those arcane rules that are in place that no one's really put a lot of thought into that eventually are going to get removed and chipped away. And right now, when you look at the marijuana index, what you're seeing is companies that are essentially involved in a gold rush. As each of those little rules changes, more companies dive into the place. As we get the ability to have vending machines, the vending machine companies will jump in there. And GW Pharmaceuticals is a $2 billion company on the NASDAQ, but its main reason for being is it wants to get legitimate therapeutic drugs through the FDA that have cannabinoids in them, and they're much further ahead than anyone else. When they get to the next level of FDA approval, I would imagine that every pharmaceutical company on the planet is going to be jumping all over them trying to get that technology. You've got companies that are working on compliance software. You've got companies that are consulting with growers and showing them how to get the best yields. You've got all sorts of research going on, trying to figure out what strain fixes what ailment. It's a massive business, and still the public generally still just looks at it as there's a lot of dispensaries on the street now. But that's just the pointy end of the iceberg. There is so much more going on underneath.
That's very interesting. Now, you wanted to talk about the Canadian marijuana market versus the American one. I think we talked about how the states in the U.S. Colorado was one of the first ones to really start opening up. We've seen Washington State follow the last elections in the last couple weeks. We saw D.C. kind of open up. We started to see some of the other states slowly start to open it up. What do you think is the difference for investing opportunities between the Canadian marijuana market and the American one?
Well, if you're a day trader and you want to double your money by lunchtime, the Canadian market is not the market to be looking at. The OTC is rife with companies that are jumping and falling by 20% a day, and for sometimes no good reason. But you're taking your life in your hands with those stocks. They may or may not put audited financials out. They may or may not have an actual product. They may tell you that the warehouse is full of products ready to go to market, and those boxes are all empty. I've made money on the OTC. I've lost money on the OTC, and I tell you, I couldn't have picked either side of that equation ahead of time. It's almost like a complete fluke when something good happens. In the Washington State licensing process, 1,000+ people applied for licenses to grow, and the process by which you had to go through to get a license was you had to fork out $1,000, and then you had to get your name picked out in a lottery. And then once that happened, if you passed a background check, then you were good to go. So I've seen some of the facilities down there in Washington State, and literally what you're looking at is open-air greenhouses with teams of teenagers cutting plants with scissors and shoving the detritus into garbage bags.
That's not really scalable, right? Yeah, for a 7 or 8 figure business, really. So
no,
8 figure.
It's something where someone is going to make some good money and employ some local teenagers, and the local teenagers are probably going to fill their pockets on the way out the door. In Canada, the process to get a license, it seems kind of arbitrary from a bureaucratic point of view for a lot of people, but it's a process that involves about 18 months of background checks and checking your architectural drawings and talking to your local city fathers to make sure that you're within zoning restrictions, having best practices ready to go, standards of operation, having a master grower, having a QA person, having a company behind you that can actually make sure that you're going to get to the finish line. So you had 1,000 people who've also applied in Canada, but of those, only 15 have actually been given a license thus far over the last year. And so you're looking at 1.5% of applicants actually getting through to that place, which means that those companies that do get through are in a very rarefied air. They don't have a whole lot of competition, but the competition they have is top notch. It's well funded. It's got expertise flown in from like in the case of Bedrocan, they have a Dutch grow team that's coming out to train their people, and they have the highest standards that they've been using there for about 10 years. Tweed has 150,000 square feet of grow facility potential, and came out with some $40 million behind them. Organogram is certified organic. It's not just an organic product, but they've actually gone out and got certification to say this is actually organic. And those companies are fighting for a small market up here, but it's a market that will eventually include exports. So, when Supreme Pharmaceuticals, for example, opens up their 350,000 square foot grow facility, that's a lot of grow space, and they will have done so having gone through the cauldron of bureaucratic ups and downs and digging through every single piece of their plan to the point where they have a level 9 security system. So they actually have a bank vault level vault in which they have to have all of their products kept. Your security footage, which there's a camera covering every centimeter of the facility. Security footage is stored in the bank vault for 2 years. When people come into the facility, they're wearing hazmat suits. They've got foot basins. Everything that goes in and out is checked and rechecked, and everyone is background checked, and everyone knows where the money's going. It's a system that you really want in place for something like this. If it's going to be a gigantic industry, you want high standards. You want companies to have to achieve those high standards in order to play. Whereas in the U.S. right now, there's so many different laws, so many different standards. In Washington State, in Colorado, the rules are completely different. And federally, it's still illegal. So, you can't really get those large companies coming in and saying, all right, we're going to build a 350,000 square foot grow. Because you get the door kicked in,
Well,
Go ahead.
Well, what I've heard, Chris, also is that even if it's legal at the state level, you have problems where if you're a legit operating marijuana business in Colorado, it's going to be tough for you to take credit card payments because your bank has to deal with federal rules and regulations here in the U.S. So you might be legal in state to operate your business, but then to do banking, then it's a federal law. So there's just so many conflicts, and it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, and there's companies that have been set up that just all they do is take around armored cars and drive your cash from your dispensary to a secured location. It's in Canada, one of the big growth areas in the weed space has been companies going down to Washington State, finding licensees that suddenly have this grow license, but can't get access to any sort of capital to create their facilities. So the Canadian companies are building the facilities for them and then doing leaseback deals where they're taking, let's say, 30% of their earnings from that point forward as rent. So it's a way for the Canadian companies to do sort of an arm's length investment in the U.S. grows without having any sort of federal risk involved because they're just landlords after all.
Now, in terms of the investing opportunities, from now through 5 years, what do you see are some of the best investing opportunities? You already mentioned the over-the-counter American stocks. I mean, one of the things, I was an investment analyst at a larger firm, and I started looking into these things because some of these marijuana stocks at one point, some of them were up a couple 100%, I think, in less than a year.
Yeah.
So obviously that perks your eyes and your ears, gets you interested, but then when you dig in there, their financials are shady. You look at the backgrounds of management, a lot of them were dealing drugs or have criminal records in a lot of aspects, so they don't know, they didn't have a normal business background where they don't know how to cut costs, they don't know how to do normal business operations. They've been growing marijuana or doing marijuana businesses off the books for years. Mm-hmm. What do you think is a way, is there better management teams in Canada then where we're going to see people who have run legitimate businesses before move into the marijuana industry? Because we've also seen in Canada, and you can comment on this since you do write for one of the top investing websites in Canada, there's also been a lot of junior miners, right, because the metals prices have dropped. You've seen them, these shell companies, they switch their name to marijuana name. How do investors find good companies with good management who can actually execute a business plan in marijuana space and avoid, these shell companies where maybe they were a miner 5 months ago in Canada and, because metals prices dropped, they changed their name to a marijuana company?
Yeah. Well, my interest in the space came about because of that trend that suddenly all these mining companies were changing business. I thought it seemed a little shady, to say the least, for miners that hadn't necessarily had a mine for 5 years to suddenly reawaken and say, we're going to be experts in marijuana. A lot of those companies that were first off the block in that little rush have fallen by the wayside already. They've run out of money. They didn't really have a plan. They might have ridden their shares up from 2 cents to 15 cents and cashed a lot of paper out before they kind of drifted back into the shadows. And some of the early rockets in the industry, like the Anatopias and the Grow Lifes, sort of had their moment in the sun and then died very quickly because they didn't have strong management behind them. What we've seen in the last 2 months, in Canada anyway, has been companies really sort of using their licensing approval as an indication of their excellence. A lot of shareholders sort of buying stocks that they think are about to get announced as licensed producers, and then as soon as the license is given, there's a big sell-off because everyone's made their money now and away they go. So we still haven't really seen the companies come out with like long-term revenues that would get them to the next phase of investor, which is the long-term growth investor rather than the day trader or the event-based investor. But we were also seeing a lot of companies that have come from relatively obscurity with a good plan and suddenly become contenders. There's a company out here, Matika Enterprises, which was basically a graphite mine that came out with a chlorine dioxide pill that can be put into water supply at a grow house and eliminate mold and spider mites. So there was a moment where that was considered, maybe that'll be interesting, maybe they'll get a lot of business out of that. But the investment market moved on, and so too did Matika to getting themselves into a facility that was going through its license application. that looks like maybe they're close to getting approved, and there's a lot of volume on that stock right now, which, if you're honest, was one of those shaky mining to weed deals that I was pouring scorn on a year ago. They've actually managed to get some people and a plan and put things effectively in place, and now they're going to be legit. I think that in 6 months' time, a lot of the players that are at the top of the chain right now are going to fall away because they won't be able to get the revenues that they've been promising, and they won't be able to show the excellent management that investors have been hoping for. And companies that we don't know about yet are going to suddenly emerge as being big plays. I could see someone rolling up an absolute ton of dispensaries in Colorado or Washington State or California and becoming the Starbucks of weed, I could see somebody really getting an anchor into the edibles market and putting out some products that maybe push into the mainstream. And it's really impossible to tell who those companies are going to be right now, because every company for mine is dodgy until it's proved itself, and very, very few have proved themselves.
Okay, so you think then the market, whether it's U.S. companies or Canadian companies, is still too speculative at this point for a more conservative investor to actually look at the financials and say, this company has consistent revenue growth, they have earnings, they have free cash flow and things like that. We're not seeing that really anywhere in the sector yet. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's if someone has revenues, it's like it's time to throw a party. If I look at the marijuana index and filter it on market cap, the number 10 company on the list is Creative Edge Nutrition, which I find really difficult to not refer to as a pump and dump. The CEO right now is hiding out in the Ukraine, selling millions of shares at a time. And the city that it had what it said was going to be the world's biggest grow has basically told them to get lost. So it's a company that has no product and is nowhere near getting a license, nowhere near building a facility. The CEO is out of the country and hiding in a country that Russia's about to invade. He's cashing in tens of millions of shares, and the entire board last week resigned. And yet there are still people investing in that company. It's still a $67 million market cap, which is absurd. It's like that $67 million that within the next few weeks will become zero.
It definitely sounds like it can go to. It's a huge. You just named a couple red flags there alone, and I haven't even looked at the financials. So
it's a horror show. But they came out in January saying they were weeks away from a license. That the city had no problems with them at all. They were going to have the world's biggest marijuana grow operation. Anytime now was what they said. There was a story in the New York Post saying it was going to happen next month. And now we're months later. I've been writing about this company all year long and pointing out to people that everything they said was bullshit. And I have not stopped receiving scorn from investors who were walking around with T-shirts with the CEO's name on them. Like they literally treated this company like it was the rock star that was going to send their kids to college. And to be fair, it probably did for a lot of them, because it went from nothing to, literally half a cent to 15 cents or so. And so people that did get in on it early were making scads of cash. At one point, the first time I wrote negatively about it, a guy tweeted me a picture of his portfolio, and it said, up $995,000, and he said something like, "F you, I'm rich." And I'd written something about it, and it had gone down like 20-30% that day, and so I wrote back and said, well, I just took $90,000 out of your portfolio, so eat that. That guy now, his money is going to be worth about $90,000, right? If he's still sitting on that company. And there are people who are still sitting there. There are people who are on Investors Hub leaving messages saying that they're putting 30% of their salary into this thing every week because they still believe it's going to be the biggest thing around. Delusional shit. They're going to lose everything they have. But it's still.
You think those are real people who are posting that, or do you think those are paid stock promoters from maybe the company or a hedge fund or something like that, putting that garbage on the message boards? Because, obviously, this happens, like I've been associated in the stock market for a very long time, where you have with these small companies, you can have stock promoters or a hedge fund who has a long or short position one way, and they want to, sell out at a high price and then short the thing down to zero. So it just, who knows what's going on in the games there. I can't believe that there would be so many people, who would say, who may have a job in the business world who say, this company's not making any money, but I'm putting 30% of my paycheck into this. I don't know, man, but maybe they made hundreds of percent last year, and they're hoping the stock goes back to, those highs.
Yeah, and people fall in love with their stocks all the time. I would hope that a lot of those people are paid or part of the management team or something, because it would just make me really sad to think that there were people that, with all the options that you have to invest in, to leave your money in something that's bled 95% of its share price out in the last 2 months. But, there's no accounting for taste. And maybe there are people jumping in there now at 2 cents thinking if it goes to 2.5, then I've just made a quick ton before lunch. But, there was a company there is a company in Canada, Green and Hill Enterprises, and their whole deal was, a while back there was a Winter Olympian, a Canadian, that was busted with marijuana in his bloodstream. So he lost his gold medal and eventually argued it back. And so this guy is now at the front of this company, Green and Hill, and they're saying they're going to brand marijuana around him, and he's got such a big following, and he's such a celebrity. And so that company came out of the blocks at a $100 million valuation. An absurd valuation, considering that the 2 years previously, the only revenues that the company had made was $8,000 selling T-shirts. And yet it was a $100 million company just because of the association with marijuana, which hurts everybody. It hurts the legitimate companies. If I look at something like Bedrocan, Bedrocan's a company where they're allowed to import marijuana into Canada from the Netherlands, from their parent company. The parent company has the monopoly on medical marijuana supply in 5 European countries, and has been doing it for 15 years, and knows what it's doing. And they're building a nice big facility in Canada. And in the meantime, they've sold $1 million worth of marijuana that they've imported to patients. So a pretty good success story so far, and a company that will be churning revenue for some time to come. It's not a risky company. There's plenty of money in the bank, plenty of expertise, strong management. They don't promote. It's a company that's a grown-up play. It's worth $50 million, but Creative Edge, which has nothing at all, and a hiding out CEO is worth $10 million more.
Yeah. Sounds like Pets.com or some of these other, technology stocks where they had eyeballs, or some of them didn't even have a website. They bought a domain name, right? Or maybe they had the website up, but they didn't have a business model. They had no idea how they were going to make money off their internet business in the late 90s or mid to late 90s. And then, they just reported to the market, traffic. We had internet traffic, but they had no way of knowing how they were going to make money. Yep. So it did kind of sound similar to that. My research of the marijuana industry, and I haven't researched it as thorough as you, but what's your opinion then of these large tobacco companies? So then the Lorillards, the Philip Morris's, the Altrias here in the United States. These are large global companies. They grow tobacco. They were part of the lobbying group, many decades ago. Besides the paper companies, the alcohol companies, those guys that put the marijuana industry and hemp growing out of business. Now it looks like they're starting to think of going back into the business. What's your opinion on the large tobacco companies coming back in and developing marijuana-related businesses, because they can already grow tobacco at large scale and sell it through retail? What's your opinion on them having like a vertically integrated marijuana business in the U.S., Canada, etc.?
The moment it's federally legal to do it, they will employ the legions of hell to own the business overnight. And that's what a lot of the companies that are setting up right now are really playing for. It's not recreational. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for that big exit down the line. It's why there's such a push towards the research and the medical side. It's why the dispensaries are popping up everywhere. There's the hippie-led dispensaries where there's a table with a bunch of jars, and then there's the Apple Store dispensaries where somebody's gone in with a marketing team and set up something that looks legit. And that, down the line, they're hoping they can have 200 stores so that they can sell out to someone bigger when it's all nice and legal. I think tobacco is tobacco's a dead industry. It's an industry of death, and it's a dead industry. You can't really make more tobacco users other than by chance. So just by virtue of that, big tobacco has to push into other things, and this makes perfect sense for them. It's still in their wheelhouse. Big corporations are always the last ones to see the truth of things. You think back to the electric car and how GM had some experiments with electric vehicles 10, 20 years ago that seemed to be doing really well, and that regardless of that, they pulled them all off the roads and crushed them all because they just decided it would be easy to just continue doing what they were doing. But eventually, the market forces them back into the sun, and maybe it was easy for tobacco companies to squash hemp and dominate at one point, but markets change, economics change, realities change, and now they probably wish they didn't. Now they probably wish they doubled down on hemp, but they'll use that multi-billion-dollar bank balance they have to correct those mistakes, and one way or another they'll own the industry.
Yeah, I think long term, I think that's where the industry is going to end up. I think most of the growing facilities here in the United States, maybe also in Canada, I think the large tobacco companies are going to have at least a pretty large, I don't know if they'll own everything, but they'll at least have a large stake in it. And they may have a vertical integration model where, they're owning the dispensaries, they're owning marijuana cafes or things like that and other products. Maybe they're doing joint ventures with the pharmaceutical companies here in the U.S. where the tobacco company grows the marijuana, and then, the pharmaceutical company is either making it into a pill, like you said, or they're making it into like new types of products that help solve diseases or cancer or things like that going forward.
Yeah, I'd be really surprised if there isn't someone in a dark office at Starbucks HQ that isn't looking really seriously at whether Starbucks can start picking up dispensaries at some point in the near future, because it seems to be a natural balance to. Cafes they're not about coffee, they're about giving you somewhere you can park your butt for 40 minutes and check your email, and the coffee is basically your price of admission. And Starbucks knows that, and there's no reason why dispensaries couldn't be the same, I don't see any reason why a dispensary couldn't be running a bus service out to senior centers to pick up people on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and come pick them up for their medicine, let them take it in a nice lounge with some comfortable chairs and a nurse, and then put them back on the bus and send them home. There's all sorts of potentials in this market to be health driven, to be edibles driven, to be retail driven, to be brand driven. There's no real brand in marijuana yet. There was an announcement recently that the Bob Marley estate has given its okay to be involved with one marijuana grower. But what happens when James Franco decides he wants to be a marijuana brand, or Seth Rogen? What happens when Snoop Dogg wants to put out a brand or get behind a chain of dispensaries? Like, this thing is going to get very mainstream very quickly, and when it does, it won't be just the big tobacco that's interested. It'll be Taco Bell. It'll be Home Depot, selling hydroponic sets. It'll be all sorts of things out there that we currently don't even think about that are potentially huge businesses that someone somewhere at a big company is getting ready to pounce on as we speak.
That's very interesting. So if I could summarize then in a couple sentences your view of the marijuana market right now, it's that there's exciting growth ahead. There's a lot of investing opportunities in the future, but now is not necessarily the right time because these companies are still too early in their cycle where, they're figuring out the market, they're figuring out their business models. The management teams have to figure out how they can make money, consistently make revenue growth and earnings growth and things like that off of working in the industry within the regulatory frameworks of different states and federally and then also in Canada.
Yeah, I was just down at the Marijuana Business Expo in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, and there was 130 exhibitors there, everything from consultants to growers to hydroponics to lights to research to basically everything you could think of that had any sort of touch on marijuana was represented. And the smell of marijuana was nowhere to be seen. It was guys in suits and ties. It was booth bunnies. It was a lot of deals being done, a lot of business cards being passed around. Very, very legitimate trade show. that could just as easily have been an insurance trade show or a retail trade show. And what I noticed a lot was we're seeing less and less logos with weed leaves on them, and more companies that have marijuana out of the name of their company. Bedrocan, for example, isn't referring to itself as a medical marijuana company. It prefers medicinal cannabis. It feels that marijuana has a negative aspersion, and that really what they want to focus on is the medicinal side of it. These companies are growing up really quickly, and the companies that demonstrate their legitimacy, and I've been saying this for a year, the legitimacy is the key word. Every company should be not trusted until such a time as they've demonstrated their legitimacy. Do they have a board of directors that has chops, that has put other companies forward before? Do they have a CEO that has actually done something good in another company? Was the shell, basically detritus for the last 3 years waiting for something to come along, or was it part of an RTO with a bigger group? Are there revenues? Is there a plan for revenues? What's the plan B? If they're hoping that they're going to get a marijuana grow license and they don't get that license, what do they do with that $20 million facility that they're building? Questions that, in my consulting time anyway, I find a lot of companies have put no real thought into. They just look at the share price. They just want to get that share price up every day. They just want to raise a little money, and then they'll figure out what to do with it. You've got to look at the growing.
They've got it asked backwards, Chris. You're saying the exact thing. They should have the plan first and then worry about the share price later.
Absolutely. The share price will take care of itself. Look, I know that Bedrocan and Organogram look at their share price and they think that they're hideously undervalued, and they probably are. But they're still at the early stage where something could happen that turns the industry inside out a little bit. They're still at a place where no real leader has poked its head out and said, we're going to take this space now and we're making enough money to really justify putting your 401k into us. I know that the weed market right now, what I really like about it is it's bringing a new investor into the space. Right? The gray-haired mining resources guys, they don't really want to touch it. They're still a little afraid of it. But much the same way as the dot-com boom did, the marijuana boom has got a lot of people investing for the first time, younger people who are socially on social networks and technologically apt. And they don't necessarily look at the same things that we traditionally look at in the market as being indicators of excellence. They're not looking through the financials. They're looking at the share price. They're looking at volume. They're looking at what people are saying on Twitter, and they're hoping that they can make some quick money. And it really doesn't matter if the company's any good or not. Same as the dot-com world. So once we get through that phase and those investors get a little bit more savvy, and they'll probably get their ass kicked a few times before that happens, but when we hit that place where people actually start paying attention to revenues and corporate updates, this is going to be huge. It's going to be immense. And there will be trillions of dollars built around marijuana in the next 10, 15 years. But it will be places where you're not going to guess.
Yeah, I agree. Over the next couple decades, this is definitely a growth bull market, but right now I think it's too early. I would watch what the tobacco companies are doing to move in. For listeners who are more conservative, because you can get tobacco company dividends that way, but I think the tobacco companies, because they see growth, because like you said, the rest of their businesses are dying and their customers are dying, that they're going to look to the marijuana industry for their growth going forward. Now, I just want to thank you again for your time, Chris. We're about almost at 50 minutes here. I want to thank you again for your time. Please tell our listeners where they can find your work and your articles, and we'll definitely have you on again for another marijuana update in another couple months so you can update our listeners about the marijuana industry and markets.
Sure. If you go to stockhouse.com or stockhouse.com/marijuana, even better, you'll be able to find my writings. I generally, a couple of times a week, I'll do a deep dive on one company in the Canadian space. And we'll go into great detail about everything to do with their business model. Before I do those, I generally get into the boardroom and start slashing and burning all the marketing materials and try to get to the stuff that the CEO doesn't really want to talk about. But we've managed to actually find that a lot of the companies that aren't afraid of that, it's a good sign that you can actually trust their businesses. So stockhouse.com. Look for Chris Parry, and you can follow me on Twitter as well, @Chris Parry, and let me know what you think.
Great. And like I said, I think in the next couple decades, I've seen the marijuana documentaries. There's literally hundreds of different products for marijuana and hemp. So I think this is we're starting to get them, both legalized again. I think there's a really good future here. I think it's not really good investments in terms of the financials or companies. The share price in the short term it's a danger the higher it goes, especially when you're seeing the red flags that you mentioned. Thank you for alerting our listeners about this, and hopefully this answered a lot of our listeners' questions about the marijuana industry, because we got a number of them about the marijuana industry and whether it's a good investment. And I'm happy I got Chris on finally to talk about his expertise with the industry.
Thanks, man.